Ladies and gentlemen, there are those who believe they can act without consequence. They deceive, they manipulate, they harm others, thinking that their actions will be forgotten, buried, or dismissed as insignificant. But reality does not work that way. Every choice we make carves a path, not just in the world around us, but within ourselves. When someone inflicts harm on another, they believe they have won. They have asserted dominance, taken control, or silenced opposition. But in truth, they have paid a price they do not yet understand. What happens when you lie, when you betray, when you tear another person down? You may escape immediate judgment, but your own mind is keeping score. You begin to see yourself as someone capable of such acts, and that realization erodes your character. The more you indulge in destruction, the weaker and more lost you become. And what of the victims? Many who have suffered at the hands of others feel as if their pain will never be recognized. But history shows us something remarkable. Those who endure suffering can rise. They can learn, grow, and become stronger than they ever imagined. And often, in time, those who believe themselves untouchable face a reckoning they never expected. No wrongdoing disappears into nothingness. It lingers, it festers, and it demands payment. The question is not whether there will be consequences, but when they will arrive. The past does not simply fade, it shapes the future. So, to those who believe their actions carry no weight, be warned, every deed has a cost. And to those who have suffered, take heart. Strength is built in adversity, and the truth, in the end, has a way of making itself known. The hidden price of harm. Many people go through life believing they can act as they please, without facing any real consequences. They deceive, manipulate, or mistreat others, thinking their actions will simply fade into the past without repercussions. This belief is not just mistaken, it is profoundly dangerous. Every harmful action, whether seen or unseen, carries a cost, one that is often far greater than the perpetrator initially realizes. At first glance, it may seem as though small acts of wrongdoing, whether lies, betrayal, or emotional neglect, are insignificant. A person might think, if no one notices, if no one fights back, then does it really matter? But the truth is that the world is structured in such a way that every action has a ripple effect. No act exists in isolation. When someone chooses to harm another, they set into motion a chain of events that will eventually return to them. One of the most overlooked aspects of harm is its impact on the person who commits it. Many believe they can lie or manipulate without consequence, but every dishonest action subtly reshapes their character. The more one indulges in cruelty, the easier it becomes to justify further wrongdoing. Over time, the person who once acted in secret begins to act openly, believing they are beyond accountability. This leads to a gradual erosion of self-respect and a life built on deception, leading to deeper emotional and psychological turmoil. Consider how the mind responds to wrongdoing. A person who consistently engages in unethical behavior might try to suppress feelings of guilt, but they cannot erase the truth from their subconscious. Their actions create an internal conflict, a battle between the person they were and the person they have become. Over time, this leads to anxiety, distrust, and a sense of inner emptiness. They may try to escape these feelings through distraction, substance abuse, reckless behavior, or constant validation from others. But the cost remains. The weight of their actions cannot be ignored indefinitely. The external consequences are just as inevitable. People who exploit or harm others often believe they are immune from justice, but reality has a way of correcting such imbalances. Perhaps the person they wronged rises to a position of influence. Perhaps their reputation crumbles as the truth comes to light. Or Perhaps they simply become trapped in a life where they are surrounded by people just like themselves, untrustworthy, dishonest, and cruel. What they once controlled eventually controls them. The effects of harm are not limited to individuals. A society in which people believe they can act without consequence soon becomes unstable. Trust erodes, relationships break down, and institutions collapse. History has shown us time and again that civilizations fall not simply due to external threats, but because they decay from within. When people no longer believe in accountability, corruption spreads like an infection, weakening the very foundations that once made them strong. On the other hand, those who have suffered at the hands of others often possess something their abusers lack: resilience. When a person faces hardship and refuses to be broken by it, they develop a strength that cannot be easily undone. Pain, when confronted with courage, becomes a source of wisdom and power. Many of the world's greatest thinkers, leaders, and artists have drawn inspiration from their struggles, transforming their suffering into something meaningful. So, what is the hidden price of harm? It is the slow decay of character, the eventual loss of trust, and the inescapable burden of guilt. It is the way a life built on deception crumbles under its own weight, and it is the reality that, while wrongdoing may go unpunished for a time, the consequences, both internal and external, are never truly avoided. The cost of harm is not always immediate, but it is always there, and in the end, no one escapes it. The erosion of character. When people engage in harmful behavior, they often believe they are in control. They assume that their actions, whether deceitful, manipulative, or cruel, will only affect others. They convince themselves that they can walk away from their choices unchanged, as though morality is a game where only the weak suffer consequences. But this is a profound misunderstanding of how human nature works. The truth is that every act of wrongdoing, no matter how small, reshapes the person committing it. Character is not something fixed, it is built and reinforced by the choices we make each day. A single dishonest act may seem insignificant, but it sets a precedent. The first lie makes the second easier. The first betrayal makes the next one feel justified. Over time, a person who continuously engages in destructive behavior loses the ability to see themselves clearly. They no longer recognize how far they have strayed from the person they once were. One of the most dangerous aspects of character erosion is that it happens gradually. Rarely does someone wake up one day and decide to become dishonest, cruel, or corrupt. Instead, they take small steps in the wrong direction, rationalizing their behavior along the way. They tell themselves, this is just once, this is necessary, this is harmless. But over time, those justifications pile up until they no longer need them at all. What was once a conscious choice becomes a habit. What was once an exception becomes their nature. This process is particularly deceptive because, for a time, it may appear as though nothing is wrong. A person who lies or manipulates might find temporary success. They may avoid consequences, maintain their social standing, or even gain more power. But what they fail to see is that they are losing something far more valuable than what they gain. They are losing their integrity, their ability to trust others, and ultimately, their ability to trust themselves. A person who deceives others inevitably starts deceiving themselves. They begin to believe their own lies. They construct a version of reality that protects them from guilt or responsibility. But self-deception is a dangerous trap. It leads to poor decisions, paranoia, and the inability to form real, meaningful relationships. No one can build a stable, fulfilling life on a foundation of falsehoods. Eventually, the cracks will show. Another consequence of character erosion is the loss of resilience. People with strong character can withstand hardship because they know who they are. They can face challenges with confidence, knowing they are guided by principles that keep them grounded. But those who have compromised their integrity lack this foundation. When difficulty arises, they have nothing solid to stand on. Their relationships are built on lies, their achievements are hollow, and their self-worth is dependent on maintaining an illusion. The moment that illusion collapses, they are left with nothing. There is also a deep psychological cost. A person who harms others, even if they believe they are justified, carries the weight of those actions. The human mind is not built to function in conflict with itself for long. Guilt, whether acknowledged or not, manifests in different ways. Chronic anxiety, self-loathing, destructive habits, or an inability to experience genuine joy. Many who have lived a life of manipulation or cruelty eventually find themselves trapped in a cycle of dissatisfaction, constantly chasing external validation to fill an emptiness that cannot be filled. This is why integrity is so important. It is not just about morality in a social sense. It is about maintaining internal stability. A person who consistently chooses honesty, kindness, and responsibility is not just helping others. They are preserving their own well-being. They are ensuring that when they look in the mirror, they can respect the person looking back at them. No one escapes the consequences of their actions. Those who erode their character through deceit and cruelty may not see the damage immediately, but it is happening nonetheless. And by the time they realize what they have lost, it is often too late to repair. The long-term consequences. People often believe that their actions exist in isolation, that a single act of dishonesty, manipulation, or cruelty will disappear with time. They convince themselves that as long as they are not caught or confronted, they are free from consequences. But this is one of the greatest delusions a person can entertain. The choices we make, especially those that harm others, do not simply vanish. They accumulate, shaping our lives and our futures in ways we rarely anticipate. There is a fundamental principle that governs human behavior. What we do today determines who we become tomorrow. A person who engages in wrongdoing may feel no immediate consequences, but they are laying the foundation for future suffering. They may believe they have escaped judgment, but time has a way of bringing hidden truths to the surface. Betrayal, dishonesty, and cruelty do not fade into nothingness. They return, often with greater force than expected. One of the most overlooked aspects of long-term consequences is the way they affect relationships. Trust is fragile. It takes years to build, but only moments to break. A person who lies or manipulates may get away with it temporarily, but each act chips away at their credibility. Over time, even those closest to them begin to sense something is wrong. They may not immediately identify the deception, but they feel the inconsistency, the lack of authenticity. And once trust is damaged, it is almost impossible to fully restore. Beyond relationships, wrongdoing also impacts a person's future opportunities. A person who consistently acts without integrity may find short-term success, but their reputation follows them. Whether in personal life or professional environments, character matters. People remember how they were treated. They remember who kept their word and who broke it. Over time, those who build their lives on deception find that doors begin to close. Opportunities shrink, alliances weaken, and they become increasingly isolated. But perhaps the most devastating consequence is internal. A person who engages in wrongdoing slowly loses the ability to respect themselves. They may suppress guilt for a time, but deep down they know what they have done. This leads to a form of self-destruction that is difficult to escape. A person who betrays others eventually betrays themselves. They start making choices that work against their own best interests. They sabotage relationships, ruin opportunities, and engage in self-destructive habits, all because they cannot bear to face the truth about who they have become. Regret is one of the most painful emotions a person can experience. Many who have engaged in wrongdoing eventually reach a moment of reckoning where they see the full weight of their actions. At that point, the damage is often irreversible. Friendships are lost, family bonds are severed, professional opportunities have disappeared, and perhaps worst of all, they realize that the person they have become is not someone they admire. Contrast this with those who choose integrity even in difficult circumstances. A person who consistently acts with honesty and kindness builds a future they can be proud of. They earn the trust of others, create lasting relationships, and develop a sense of inner peace. They may face challenges, but they do not live in fear of exposure or retaliation. They move through life with confidence, knowing that they have built something real. The long-term consequences of our actions are unavoidable. Those who believe they can act without accountability are only deceiving themselves. They may not feel the weight of their choices today, but time does not erase wrongdoing. It only delays its effects. The past has a way of catching up, and when it does, it often demands a price that is far higher than anyone anticipated. The power of truth and accountability. One of the greatest illusions people hold is the belief that they can escape the truth. They convince themselves that if they avoid responsibility, deny their mistakes, or shift blame onto others, they can live without consequence. But the truth is not something that can be buried forever. It is relentless, and it has a way of resurfacing when least expected. The only real path to a meaningful and stable life is through truth and accountability. Truth is not just a moral principle, it is a fundamental structure that keeps individuals and societies from falling apart. When someone lies, whether to themselves or to others, they create instability. A life built on deception is like a house with a weak foundation. It may stand for a while, but it will inevitably collapse. Every lie requires more lies to sustain it. Every evasion of responsibility leads to greater internal conflict. And over time, the person who refuses to face the truth becomes trapped in a reality of their own making, one that is increasingly disconnected from the real world. Accountability is what keeps people grounded. It is the willingness to admit when we are wrong, to face the consequences of our actions, and to learn from them. While it may be uncomfortable in the short term, it is the only way to prevent mistakes from turning into patterns of self-destruction. When a person refuses accountability, they are not avoiding suffering. They are only postponing it. And the longer they wait, the heavier the consequences become. One of the most powerful aspects of accountability is that it restores integrity. People who take responsibility for their actions, even when it is difficult, build trust and respect. Others may not always agree with them, but they will recognize their honesty. In contrast, those who consistently avoid accountability lose credibility. Over time, people stop believing in their words, and their influence diminishes. A person without trust is isolated, and isolation is one of the most painful consequences a person can face. There is also a psychological toll that comes with avoiding the truth. Those who engage in deception or wrongdoing often carry a constant fear of being exposed. This fear shapes their decisions, limiting their ability to think clearly and act confidently. They become defensive, paranoid, and anxious, always watching over their shoulder. In contrast, those who live truthfully experience a kind of freedom that cannot be bought or faked. They do not have to remember false narratives, cover up past mistakes, or manipulate others to maintain control. Their lives are simpler, and with that simplicity comes peace. At the societal level, accountability is what prevents chaos. When people believe they can act without consequence, corruption spreads, institutions collapse, relationships disintegrate, and distrust becomes the norm. But when truth and responsibility are valued, societies thrive. People feel safe when they know that justice exists, that wrongdoing will not be ignored, and that integrity matters. Perhaps the most powerful transformation occurs when a person who has lived in denial chooses to confront the truth. It is not an easy process. It requires humility, courage, and the willingness to endure discomfort. But those who take this step often find that it leads to something extraordinary: growth. By acknowledging past mistakes, they gain wisdom. By accepting consequences, they rebuild trust. And by embracing truth, they rediscover their own strength. Truth is not something to be feared, it is something to be embraced. The cost of avoiding it is far greater than the discomfort of facing it. And the sooner one chooses to live with honesty and accountability, the sooner they can build a life that is not only stable, but deeply fulfilling. The strength of the victim. When people endure mistreatment, they often feel powerless. Those who have been deceived, betrayed, or harmed may believe they have lost something that can never be recovered. It is easy to assume that the ones who cause harm hold all the power, while the victims are left to carry the weight of their suffering. But this assumption is not only false, it is entirely backward. The truth is that those who endure suffering have the greatest potential for strength. Hardship, when met with resilience and wisdom, forges something unshakable within a person. While pain can be overwhelming in the moment, it carries within it the possibility of transformation. A person who has been broken but refuses to stay broken is far stronger than someone who has never been tested. History is full of examples of individuals who turned their suffering into a source of power. Many of the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and artists have emerged from hardship. They did not rise because they were spared from pain. They rose because they refused to let pain define them. When someone endures adversity and chooses to keep moving forward, they gain something that cannot be taken away: resilience. One of the most dangerous lies that victims believe is that they are permanently damaged. While suffering leaves scars, scars are not signs of weakness, they are proof of survival. Every person who has faced hardship and refused to let it destroy them has gained something invaluable: the knowledge that they can withstand difficulty and still continue. There is also a kind of wisdom that comes from suffering. People who have been deceived learn to see through deception. Those who have been betrayed understand the importance of trust. Those who have been mistreated develop a deeper sense of empathy. The experiences that once felt like burdens become tools for understanding the world more clearly. Moreover, suffering can be a source of motivation. Many who have faced adversity choose to use their experiences as fuel to create something meaningful. Some turn their pain into art, expressing what words cannot capture. Others dedicate themselves to helping those who are facing similar struggles. Some use their hardships as a lesson, ensuring they never treat others the way they were treated. In all these cases, suffering is not wasted. It is transformed into something valuable. It is also important to recognize that those who harm others often believe they are untouchable, but in reality, their actions make them weaker, not stronger. People who manipulate, deceive, or harm others are often running from their own inadequacies. Their cruelty is not a sign of power, but a symptom of their own inner turmoil. In contrast, those who endure suffering and continue to act with integrity are building real strength. For those who have been mistreated, the most powerful thing they can do is refuse to be defined by their past. They may carry pain, but they also carry the ability to rise above it. They may have suffered injustice, but they have the power to ensure that suffering does not control their future. The greatest revenge against cruelty is not bitterness, it is growth. It is the decision to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than those who caused harm. The victim who refuses to stay a victim becomes something far greater, a survivor, a fighter, and ultimately a force that cannot be broken. Pain is not the end of the story. For those who are willing to face it, process it, and use it, it can be the beginning of something far greater than they ever imagined.